Title of the presentation is Flintlock AI Companion, the development of Enki, which talks about sort of the architectural decisions that and the development of the story of how Enki was developed in the game in Flintlock, The Siege of Dawn. So for me, how it began for me was that I joined A44 in 2020, around April, May, and at that time the game hadn't been publicly announced, so I didn't actually know what I was getting into. So I was hired as a technical QA, so I was responsible for making automated tests. So I remember the first day what happened was that I actually set up the editor and opened up the editor and then pressed the green play button in the Unreal editor that basically starts the game, and what spawned in was a female soldier with a little orange fox. And this picture here is actually one of the oldest pictures of Nor that's available. And if you notice, she actually has a mohawk here, because when I first played, Nor originally had this mohawk, and she had a sword instead of an axe, and she had sort of this light blue coat and white pants, and Enki was this little orange fox, and I was like, hey, this is a really cute little fox. And I remember asking this guy, hey, what's with the little fox? And he said, oh, that little fox, oh yeah, he's a god. And so this is the god. So Enki is not actually a fox. He's more of a Crimea. He has a fox body. He has horns. He has little chicken feathers and a big sort of feathery tail. And he has little monkey hands that he walks on. And he's a god who performs amazing miracles like teleporting around and cursing people. And he follows you the whole game and fights on your side. And he's named after an ancient Sumerian god of trickery and semen. And so from what I was told, one of the, what I sort of know about, was one of the first challenges to actually creating Enki was actually getting him to keep up with you. So the hero character had already existed. The hero could run, sprint, jump, double jump, because could double jump all the way back in 2020. And somehow Enki needs to be able to follow you. Now, even though Enki has like 4 legs and you think he could like run really quickly, he actually isn't very maneuverable. He actually like moves like a car. So he like steers to the left and steers to the right. He can't do like a sudden turn a normal human can, and this does make it very difficult for him to sort of keep up with a crazy double jumping character. So from the very get-go, the idea was to fix all these problems is to simply have Enki able to teleport. When he attacks, he teleports. If he wants to get to an enemy, he teleports. If you get stuck, he teleports. If you double jump onto somebody's roof, he'll just teleport to you. And that basically just solved all those problems, and that made things very easy. So also in 2020, we actually had this meeting where we sort of discussed sort of the idea of the game, sort of the world and the thing. I remember that meeting very well. And it sort of described sort of the relationship between Nor and Enki, the soldier I mentioned earlier. So Nor fights with axe and black powder, and Enki fights purely with magic. And Nor is purely non-magical, and Enki is entirely magic. And they work together to defeat evil gods. And the only way to defeat the evil gods is by Enki absorbing them after they've been injured by Nor's black powder, because gods don't seem to like black powder that much. And that was actually kind of interesting with the whole Nor not casting magic thing, because obviously in game, Nor never goes abracadabra and kills people, but Nor had some very magical equipment. Like you got this burning axe, and you got this armor that has some very impressive enchantments. So so the exact interpretations of the design pillars sort of changed, but very early on, designers had all these ideas like, oh, we'll have Enki teleport the guns in, and like people were like, no, that's too magical. The equipment's not magical, and after we had that meeting, we began something known as the Enki milestone. So Enki was able to follow you, and he would just like sort of stare at you awkwardly when you're like fighting enemies. And we had to add several core features to Enki, namely his ability to fight, the rift travel, and also his ability to talk and do other things. So when it comes to Enki's attacks, he has some which he does automatically. So if you unlock the taunt, he'll just automatically taunt enemies and they'll start running over to beat him up. Though most attacks are actually done by you ordering him to do. So originally the attack, so he sort of has sort of two main sort of attacks that sort of go for him. One is his normal teleportation attacks, which inflict curses and do damage, and these attacks give you ultimate charge, which allows you to do an ultimate attack, because once your ultimate meter is full, you unleash the ultimate thing and do tons of damage. And this involved something known as ultimate loot. So it's not loot like looter shooter loot or loot as in like loot box loot, but rather it was this system where whenever you hurt an enemy, depending what type of damage you did, it would drop different resources. So Enki teleport attacks dropped ultimate loot, hitting someone with your axe dropped black powder loot, and shooting someone with a gun actually made you drop armor loot or health loot. And there was also like currency loot, because there was actually money in the game at one point. And this system of like dropping the loot sort of still exists. If you hit people with your axe, you do actually still gain powder, and if Enki teleports and hits someone, that does give ultimate charge, but nothing actually gets like dropped on the ground and you have to pick up. And the thing is that when you want to attack, you have to do it. So all of Enki's attacks, so here we see the absorb attack, that's done by holding the Y button, and normal attacks are done by actually just pressing the Y button. So then there was this other thing that called lost soul traveling, which was the original Enki travel. So it was sort of a feature that Enki sort of gained. So what happens is that in the game there are these large sort of triangles in the air, and if you press the Y button, you'll travel over to it, and then you can travel to another triangle and to another triangle, and then move around. And originally it was called lost soul traveling because it actually involved lost souls or dead people. So what happened was that the original sort of concept art had this sort of dead enemy that was, not enemy, but a dead character that was sort of similar to this coffee shop owner, where it was sort of this thing with this dress of a whole bunch of arms, and the idea was that this arm thing would throw you around to other arm things, and you basically do this, you sort of like grab onto people's arms and sort of travel through the air for all these dead people, and yeah, the whole sort of grabbing onto people's arms and like the hand-eye cape for that was like, yeah, that was way too complicated, so they decided, how about we just use triangles? That's just a lot simpler. So the lost soul traveling basically turned into Enki traveling, and so that was something that Enki sort of acquired. And again, as I mentioned, this is controlled with the Y or triangle button on your controller. And now this is the one which I actually know a lot about. This is that there's conversations in the game. So the conversation system existed all the way back in Ashen. It was this system called Totra, which in its purest form was just a bunch of dialogue nodes that you connect up, and basically it's either like, yeah, the person you're talking to says the line, and then you have dialogue options and that kind of stuff. And adding Enki to it added a whole new layer of complexity, because suddenly is it like, are you speaking, or is Enki speaking, or is the person I'm talking to speaking? And as I mentioned, it was a plugin, so it didn't actually know that the game is saltpeter, so it doesn't really know about Enki, and this involved a whole bunch of interesting challenges to develop, and whenever you want to do a conversation in game, you do it with the Y button. So it sort of gets us to our second problem. As I mentioned, Y button makes you interact, it makes you talk, it makes Enki travel, and it makes Enki attack. So if you had all of these on screen, which one do you actually want to do? And this was a problem that was actually assigned to me around, it would have been about 2021, which was actually around the same time I actually began my master's degree, actually, which I completed this year, actually. And and interestingly enough, my master's supervisor was actually Simon McCallum, who we met earlier. So what I noticed that all of these things had in common is they all involved targets. So basically, so basically how the targets work is that in game, if you want an actor to be a target, you give it something known as a target component, or you give it an interaction component. And what happens is that using Unreal Engine's async screen sweeps, you basically just look at the screen and you collect all the targets on screen, and then you decide which target is the best target by scoring them. The scoring is based on distance to the player, distance to the center of the screen, and if the hero's body is facing it. And this, of course, led to a whole bunch of balancing issues and things. So if you had an explosive barrel right next to you, but the camera was facing this way, there's an enemy very far away in front of you, do you want to shoot the barrel right next to you or the enemy far away in front of you? And QA had a lot of fun blowing themselves up by hitting the wrong target. And what happens is that when we try to find these targets, we do different types of queries. So the first type of target is, so the hard lock-on, soft lock-on, Enki target, and all these other, so the first few, except for interactions, any target can be a combination of all these things. Something can be both a hard lock-on target and an Enki travel target, but interactions had their own components, so they were actually separate, but they were still being searched for with sweeps. And what happens is that the hard lock-on is pretty simple. So when you got a controller and you sort of press the right stick, you basically just hard lock on to the character. So whenever you press the Y button, Enki will do the Enki attack on the hard lock-on component. The soft lock-on is where if you've not engaged in the hard lock-on, but you're near an enemy, you get this little white dot on the enemy, and the camera will slowly drift towards that character. And if you've got a soft lock-on target, you will, Enki will attack it. And also if you decide to shoot Norse guns, you'll also shoot the same target. The Enki proxy weapon target is actually very interesting. So with the Enki proxy weapon, that's basically a weapon that Enki has, which listens to the player's inputs. That's actually how Enki's actually doing his attacks. And what the idea of the Enki proxy weapon target search was that if you have an enemy who is in the hard lock-on distance, but not within the soft lock-on distance, when you do press the Y button, that character will be attacked by Enki's attack. So that's why it's called an Enki proxy weapon attack. And then there's the travel targets, which are obviously just the triangles. And then there was this interesting one called the travel attack target, because the original idea with the rift traveling or the Enki traveling was that you could actually end your travel by crashing into an enemy and doing a ton of damage with it. And as a result, an enemy would be like simultaneously a hard lock-on target, a soft lock target, and an Enki travel attack target. And that was a sort of attack that you could actually do in the game, but that attack ultimately got cut because it was a gap closer, and design really didn't like gap closers because, like, you'd have an enemy who's like up on a cliff and they like don't want you to go on that cliff, so they kind of actually got that cut. But internally it actually still exists and we do still search for it. So in the end, so what I decided to do to sort of control the Y thing was that basically by having a Y priority. So basically if you're engaged in a hard lock-on, we don't do the other queries. We don't search for travel targets. We don't care about the soft lock-on target. If we're in a hard lock-on, we only care about the hard lock-on target. So that one was always the highest priority. Then your second highest priority would be an interaction. So if you have a legal interaction on screen, that will be what you'll do when you press the Y button. It doesn't matter if you see an enemy in the distance, Enki won't attack it, you'll just interact with the thing that's in front of you. Then the third highest priority was the travel target if the hero's in the air. So if you played the game, you'll be like, you can travel from like triangle to triangle, and how would you end up attacking an enemy? Because originally if the triangle traveled, you would actually go to the triangle, then pop right out, and then you'd have to jump to another triangle before you splat on the ground. And obviously if you're doing that, you want to go to another triangle and not hit someone on the ground because you don't want to hit the ground. Then the fourth highest is Enki soft lock on targets, and the lowest was actually just travel targets. So normally you want to fight an enemy and not go traveling around because we want people fighting, not fleeing. So after the Enki milestone, most of the features for Enki were mostly done. However, other features of the game were added, which would lead to them involving Enki one way or another, because literally everything in the game somehow relates to Enki one way or another. And one thing that came up was Enki's relationship problems. So Enki is an AI character, and AI characters in the game are normally spawned by spawner components, which are encounters. And on encounters, it states whose side they're on, and also states who's hostile to who. And the AI of different factions will end up fighting each other. And the encounters and the individuals had a system where if they're fighting someone, they will want to attack whoever has hurt them the most. And this led to an interesting problem, because if Enki is going around damaging people and hurting people, and he's the #1 priority target, this was an issue because most enemies can't actually attack Enki. And also, even if they wanted to attack Enki, they couldn't actually hurt him. So you get these cases of people being very angry at Enki but couldn't do anything about it. And then there was this whole weary enemy system where an enemy who is wary will only attack you if you attack it first. So sort of the birds, the moas were actually kind of like that. And there was this massive bug where like you attack them with Enki, but they get mad at Enki, but they don't attack him, and they don't attack you because, well, you didn't attack them. And also, theoretically, Enki could also kill, steal reputation or experience or whatever we were using at that time period, and that was kind of a problem. So the solution to all these bugs for Enki was basically everything Enki does, it's all your fault. So if Enki attacks the Moa thinks you attacked it. If Enki kills someone, Enki didn't kill someone, you killed someone. And Enki can beat someone up as much as they want, and they'll think that you're beating them up and not Enki. So that by basically overriding certain things in the perception, that sort of solved these bugs here. So now we get to sort of my favorite bit, the false Enki. So as the game developed, we had like the main menu, inventory, cinematics, and for all these different things, we ended up having some alternative Enkis showing up, or false Enkis as I like to call them. So the first false Enki is actually kind of an interesting one. It's actually Uru, the big evil god who attacked you at the start of the game. So if you actually look at Uru, I don't have a picture of him, but he basically is very similar to Enki. He has a large black body with feathers, but instead of a face, he has a black void. Instead of monkey hands, he has sharp talons. Instead of a feathery tail, he's a big spike. And the original idea was that he was supposed to be sort of this evil Enki, a false Enki created by the other gods to replace Enki, but that part of the plot was changed. But Uru's mesh still remained the same. So there's actually a reason why, like, Uru and Enki look very similar to each other, whereas he doesn't look anything like the other gods who are have armor and little twig legs and like a dress and that kind of weird stuff like the other ones do. So yeah, he was sort of the first Enki. But as for the other false Enkis, the next sort of one was the cinematic Enki. So basically, whenever you have a cutscene or a cinematic, what happens is that all AI characters are set to hidden, or basically they enter sort of a hide state where they all go invisible, and then these alternative versions, these cinematic versions appear, they do their cinematic, and then the cinematic ends, and then the real people pop back in, and you go off and start fighting and such. And it worked pretty well, but there was this interesting problem with actually hiding Enki, because the thing is that at the start of the game, you don't have Enki in the trenches, but you do have Enki in the trenches. Enki is always with you. It's just the thing is that he goes to sleep. He's put into a sleep state where he's just not present, and this led to some interesting bugs, or it's like, the first intro cutscene ends and then suddenly Enki appears because, yeah, people are supposed to appear, and so he had to involve this hide stack, and that was a huge nightmare to maintain and such. But that wasn't so bad in the end, though. And then you have the mannequins. So the mannequins are pretty interesting. So the mannequins exist in the main menu and the inventory screen. So the characters you see there are what is known as the. So originally I created this class called Hero Mannequin, which basically, if you're in the inventory screen, it copies whatever mesh the hero currently has, and if you're in the main menu, it'll load your most recent save and dress up the character appropriately. And eventually, Mannequin was changed from Hero Mannequin to just Mannequin because it turned out Enki needed a mannequin because his appearance also changed. So that one worked out quite nicely. And then there were the Enki teasers. So when you're at the tutorial at the start of the game where Enki hasn't joined you yet, we have these things where he sort of there, says a line and teleports out. Those things are not actually Enkis. They're actually what are known as Enki teasers, where they basically appear, say a line, and sort of teleport off when you get close to them, and the game is sort of full of them. They weren't that bad. I mean, theoretically, they could have been problematic because Enki has a lot of polygons. So when I last checked, he has like 40,000 or 60,000. He has a lot of polygons. Having multiple copies of him can be very problematic, but in the end, it didn't cause us that much issues. But that was something that existed and is used when we want to show an Enki, but not enable the true Enki yet. So then there was finally the most awful thing ever was actually the fake quest NPC. You see, what happened was that during development there was a lot of issues with the spawning system. So if you wanted to spawn in a character, there was a lot of things that could go wrong, because a character could spawn in before the ground is loaded, so they'd have nowhere to step on. And then there were issues where their behavior tree would turn on before their meshes, and also would try to async load the mesh, and that would sometimes take a very long time, and you'd just be standing there awkwardly, and then suddenly the character pops in. And this was causing a lot of problems for people who were trying to do quests and such, because it's a bit awkward to do a director review and things aren't working. And the designers couldn't really just go into C++ and change things. But what they could do was they had blueprints. So all they had to do, put a skeletal mesh in, put the mesh they want in, put the conversation component on, and there we go, problem solved. They can just talk to this imposter. They didn't have to worry about the spawner system. They didn't have to worry about setting up the encounter to say who's hostile to who, and that that seemingly solved a whole lot of problems, except it sort of didn't, because you ended up with problems where like the characters don't have foot IK. They can't put their feet on the ground, and we ended up having a whole bunch of duplicate code between the two systems and such. But when it came to Enki, however, this came to like something that I really, really hated was this fake quest NPC Enki. Because normally Enki talks to you passively, where you just walk and Enki will just say something. But there were moments where we wanted Enki to sit down so you could talk to him in an active conversation directly. And the solution was to have this basically imposter show in. So what happens is real Enki teleports out, this imposter teleports in, and then you can talk and shop with him, because originally you could actually shop with him and upgrade him by talking to him. And it was really bad. It had just every sort of bug imaginable. So if this false Enki appearing, Enki could not attack, travel, or perform ultimate attacks because it's not the real Enki. The true Enki would be saying the audio lines who is asleep instead of the imposter who's like right in front of you. And all the quests, except for one of them, had Enki aware of all conversation Nor had with people. So whenever you have a conversation with Nor, Enki teleports right next to you. But if this false Enki is too busy being false Enki, he's not going to teleport next to you to do the conversation. And also hiding Enki, and also the teleport out and teleport in had a whole bunch of bugs mixed with it, because we already had enough problems to hide stack with the cinematics, but false Enki wasn't any much better, because it'd be like you hit the trigger for them to swap, but the thing is that what happened if you like exit the trigger when they're like mid-teleporting, and that would just break everything, and it was just really, really bad. So we were at the stage of the game where we were sort of entering this near content lock, so if we wanted to do something, we had to make a presentation to prove that this is definitely a good idea. So I actually made this little presentation called Everything False Enki Can Do, True Enki Can Do Better, and it had this huge PowerPoint of all these lists of just everything wrong with false Enki, and these are just some of the points that I remembered, and I proposed a very simple solution of what we do. We just have the companion shopping volume, I initially called it, because what you do is you simply enter the volume, real Enki just teleports to where he's supposed to go, he sits down, and then you just talk to Enki by just giving him a conversation component, and then, and if you wanted to attack, he could just sit up and attack. If you started a new conversation, you'd go over to do that conversation, then go back to where he was, and that basically solved that problem. I mean, this was a really massive issue. We had like, I swear we must have had like 10 different JIRA tickets for it. It was really bad. So after getting this fixed, that actually solved quite a lot of the issues in the game, actually, because at this point, we didn't really have a whole lot we needed to actually do with Enki, because we actually got Enki mostly done in the Enki milestone. So here we were just continuing developing the rest of the game. So this would then later lead to some content for Enki being cut along the way. So these didn't all happen at one time. They happened at different parts of development. So one of the first things that was cut was actually this Enki radar. So basically how it worked was that Enki's horns would start glowing, and that the various treasure around the world would light up purple, and you could go up to the treasure and find it, because he actually detected treasure for you. And that was something that existed for quite a bit early in the game. And how it was done with some sort of shader sorcery, and it turned out to be kind of tricky to do, because like you had to make sure everything inherited it, and that turned out to be a bit of a logistical nightmare, so that ended up sort of getting cut. So, and also it's very bizarre, because like normally if you have like a dynamic material and you just wanted to change to like one color or another, you just set a scalar parameter, but it wasn't clear where on earth that was happening. So again, it was some shader sorcery, like no one could figure out how that was working. So then the next sort of thing that was kind of a bit of a funny story was actually the Enki racing. So what happened was that can't remember exactly what I was doing, but I was basically cleaning up a bunch of files and deleting a bunch of redundant ones. And I noticed there was this whole folder called Enki racing, and I contacted the design lead via Discord and say like, is Enki racing still a thing? And he gives me a link to a Confluence page, and I click the Confluence page, and the Confluence page had all the lines sort of crossed out, and there was these big red letters saying, this has been cut. And I was like, and then I replied on Discord, yeah, I think that's not a thing anymore. So yeah, I got rid of that thing. So yeah, I never actually saw an Enki race in the thing. I think it was just a prototype that never got anywhere, but yeah, that was cut pretty hard. I already mentioned the Enki travel attack, which was something that, yeah, you teleport to an enemy and you attack it, and that was sort of a gap closer. But yeah, that was something that existed quite a while in the game, though, but yeah, and does technically internally still exist, but quite kind of odd. And next, as I sort of mentioned before, there was the Enki shop. So normally when you want to upgrade Enki, you can actually do it directly in the inventory screen. You have an Enki item and you just upgrade it, and that upgrades Enki. But originally Enki actually had a shop, so if the Enki shopping volume, he would sit down and you would actually go up and talk to him and say like, okay, upgrade my stuff. Sort of similar to how you upgrade your weapons and such by talking to Baz. It was sort of the same sort of shop, but Enki's shop doesn't actually exist anymore, and again, yeah, it's done for the inventory screen. So then the final one was actually Enki petting. So the Enki petting was very simple. What happens is that Enki will actually just naturally sit, has these things called like Enki idles, which she'll just do if you're just sort of idling and not doing anything. Nor has her idle where she just does this with her axe, and Enki has these idles where she would just sit down. And if Enki entered an idle state, you could actually go up to him and press the Y button, which was an interaction, so its priority was kind of high. Nor would sort of reach over and try to pet Enki, and Enki had a number of reactions. So one of them was like jump to the side and teleport away, and then he would do a passive like, what are you trying to do? And Nor would be like, oh, I'm trying to pet you. And Enki goes like, no one goes petting gods, and doesn't like it. And then there was this other one where basically what happens is that Nora tries to reach over to Enki, and Enki slaps her hand and goes, no, no, no. And yeah, and then there was this other one which was kind of odd where she reaches over and Enki dodges by going on the ground and starts rubbing his back against the ground. And yeah, that thing was cut, and it was cut because the way the hand reached over, it was sort of a synced animation where it expected the character to be in one place and the other character to be in another exact place, so like she would like kind of miss. That was kind of odd. So that was something that ultimately sort of got cut because yeah, it didn't exactly line up correctly, but kind of a shame it got cut in my opinion because it was still working for the most part. So sort of the summary of sort of the 4 challenges I'm sort of pointed out here is first thing you sort of need to consider is that if you're going to be adding like an AI character to a game or something that follows you, because Ashton also had like an AI character that follows you, is first you need to think of like how does this character actually keep up with the player? If your player can like move very quickly and can do tons of teleportation and can double jump and things, what are some of your solutions? So I've played quite a lot of games, and I'm sure you've seen many different mechanics. So one thing to do is like, have the character do an off-screen teleport where it's like, oh yeah, they're not there. You turn around and suddenly they're right there. And then there's like sort of just the lazy teleport where they just literally pop right next to you. And like, as for like games where like the characters will actually like try to like nav all the way to you, like haven't seen too many of those. There was actually this one game in like 1996 that did that at Darkstone, that if you like teleported to a different part of the dungeon, it was a procedurally generated dungeon, the character would actually follow you, would actually nav the whole dungeon to find you, no matter how long it took. And so you definitely need to make sure you have some idea of how on earth this character is going to follow you. And another issue is obviously buttons. So when you've got your whole PlayStation controller, your Xbox controller, you have like, your X, circle, square, triangle, you got your triggers, the 2 bumpers, and then you got your sticks, and then you maybe got your D-pad. But after that, you're sort of out of buttons. So Enki had all these different abilities, talking, fast traveling, and teleporting, but most of the buttons were already devoted to things that Nor did. So you need to make sure you definitely have your buttons planned out, or if you have any kind of control of this character at all. And another sort of major issue that sort of came up is, again, like the inter-AI sort of relationship, because an interesting thing about the game was that, as I mentioned, there was the different factions that fight each other. So the game was actually kind of similar to like Halo Combat Evolved, where like the Covenant and the Flood will like fight each other, and you can then go in and join the fight. And there was actually a thing for that where all the different characters would fight each other, though the encounters were sort of moved apart, so that wouldn't normally happen, because just due to the nature of the way the game works, these characters would fight each other before you get there, and there was no real, because the characters will spawn if their level is spawned, not if you hit a trigger. So if you have inter-AI relationship, you want to make sure that obviously your AI character is, not kill stealing and doing bad things like that. And another sort of major thing you should actually think about is what alternative versions of how many copies of the character you need. So if you have like cutscenes and things, do I need a cutscene version of the character? Do I need a main menu version of the character? Because every time you add like another copy of a character, you have to maintain each of those false copies. And one thing about the game is that it actually had quite a lot of different types of actual false copies of characters. Like there's like a real versions of the sappers who like exist in the trenches just at the start of the game, and then there's like the versions in the caravan which aren't the real versions, and again you have to maintain those and you have to put them in. So those were just sort of the main ideas that sort of went in with Enki. So it's yeah, sorry, it was kind of funny. This presentation was actually a lot longer, but some of it got cut, so I guess we're done in 30 minutes instead, even though I have 50 minutes, so I guess we get 20 minutes of QA. Right, so we've got any questions? I'll comment, don't be shy. Sure.
Did you have any main inspirations for how to model Enki as an AI in other games?
So again, A44, prior to making Flintlock: The Siege of Dawn, I actually made a game called Ashen, which is sort of a co-op multiplayer, but if you can't get a friend, the co-op friend is actually AI controlled. So A44 already had experience with this kind of thing, and there were a lot of sort of plugins and content used from it before, but that was sort of the baseline for that really. And any more questions? Sure.
Could this creature fly? Sorry, I don't know what you said again. Was it mainly ground-based?
So as for how Enki moves, he has the ability to walk and he can teleport, and yeah, he does have this sort of flight ability where basically with his sort of absorber technique, I'll sort of go back to it. So he does have this thing where he is sometimes able to sort of like levitate. So he is able to fly, to actually fly, because he actually does that in this one cutscene when you first meet him in the cave. He sort of like floats in the air and a bit. So he does have this floating ability, which he does use to absorb an enemy like that. And when he does this sort of absorb thing, if he does it on a god, you can actually kill that god. But if he does it like on a normal enemy, it drops ultimate charge, which allows him to build up his ultimate meter, do his ultimate attack. So yeah, Enki actually is able to fly and teleport and do all these things to move around. It's very maneuverable. Yeah?
Hey, can you talk a bit about how the relationship between animation and AI worked?
So when it came to, so let me think. So the way this was before, the gameplay ability system was a thing, in the Unreal Engine 5, this was Unreal Engine 4. So basically how the animation for Enki works is basically you have an action system, and when he's doing an action, his body will basically do the animation that's associated with that action. So basically how the AI works is that he just uses the regular behavior tree and just goes around and will every now and again do an action. So his action, like the Enki idol, is an action. So when that action starts, that makes him do the sort of the sit down sort of animation, and when that action ends, he will just blend out back to his normal animations. And yeah, so Enki himself, I don't actually know that much about actual Enki's animations. I did do some work with Nora's animations. Now Nora's animations are actually quite interesting because she has this whole upper body and lower body thing, because you got like the secondary weapons where she can move around with her legs, but at the same time she's supposed to be aiming with her upper body. And then you have like this left arm override, so if you like shoot someone with your gun. So an interesting thing about like Nora's shooting is that she can actually withdraw her gun like very quickly. She's a very fast gunslinger. She'll actually shoot, but after she's fired a gun, if you then press the dodge button, she'll actually do this left arm override where she'll put her weapon away no matter what action she was from and do the dodge, and that was sort of that thing. So there was a lot of complexity when it came to Nora's animation, but as for Enki's animation, I don't think I've really done a lot with it, but as far as I'm concerned, I don't think it was too complicated compared to some others. Yeah?
Could you talk about how the behavior tree might have been segmented? Did you have like a big tree with different decorators that would activate sub-trees based on the copy of Enki that was active, or did you have a separate tree per copy of Enki?
As far as I'm aware of, Enki just, so we definitely had different trees, and you could actually, and we did actually like, you know, you branch into different behaviors. So Enki definitely had his own custom tree, because most enemies kind of used the same tree, and how combat worked was that they had a combat component on them which listed all their possible attacks, and what happens is that the behavior tree will wait until there's a valid attack for it to use, and then use the attack. So most enemies work by basically, if they see an enemy, they'll walk up to the enemy and keep walking in a circle until there's finally a legal attack for them to use, and then attack. And Enki is kind of similar. He sort of, if there's an enemy, he'll sort of walk in a thing and sort of like bark at it, and every now and again, if he has a certain skill unlocked, he'll use an ability if the conditions are met. But that's sort of how most of the thing kind of worked. It was primarily being controlled by a component on a character. But yeah, behavior trees were used, and there were behavior trees used for various functionalities, for like following and such, because there was actually a behavior tree for actually other NPCs to follow you, because there were moments where like other NPCs follow you, and they actually do use an off-screen teleport, but they follow you very closely and they move pretty quickly, so that was never really an issue. But yeah, Enki had his own tree, really. Anything else? Oh, yep.
With the teleportation, did you have a lot of issues like obviously the character was standing somewhere and the collision detection where it was teleported into?
Oh.
They didn't intersect with anything around?
Okay, so Enki has his own collision channel. So pretty much, Enki doesn't collide with anything other than the floor for the most part. You can just shoot him with a weapon and nothing will happen. You can shoot a cannonball right through him. You can move your camera through him. He pretty much collides with absolutely nothing. And his teleportation, there is like a validation, because there's different types of teleports, but normally it does a validation teleport where it's just like, okay, is there actually like nav in this area, and if there is, you'll sort of teleport there. But he does have some variations of other teleportations, like with the conversation component I mentioned earlier, that tells him to teleport in. But collisions were never really too much of an issue with Enki, because Enki doesn't really collide with anything, because that's just the way his mesh works. Because yeah, that's actually kind of interesting, because like the hero had her own mesh, and it was sort of set to like set off various like quest triggers and such, whereas obviously you don't want Enki setting off a quest trigger, so that's why Enki pretty much collides with nothing other than the floor. Sure.
This is a little different, but you spoke about writing functional tests. What kind of functional tests do you write for AI?
Right, so that's a bit of an interesting one. So I joined the project very, very early on, and and at this point, as I mentioned, this was before the Enki milestone. So actually, none of the tests I did had anything to do with Enki, and they pretty much all entirely had to do with Nor, because Nor was the only one who actually had some functionality. So the quests, so the automated tests I worked on varied quite a bit, and some of them were very odd. So the most important one would have actually been one which was designed to be called map check, where basically the game loads and you teleport to different parts of the map, and the camera spins around and makes sure the frame rate is good and the game isn't crashing. So that was sort of the main one I worked on. But when it came to like the first one I worked on, it was one that simply tested your height when you jumped up. And, oh no, it wouldn't have been that one. Yeah, actually, was it a damage test? But yeah, I know that was one of the earlier ones I worked on. But yeah, some of them were actually pretty bizarre. Like I got this one request to make a test to make sure you can't fight on staircases, but the thing is, nothing about staircases make you not able to fight, and it was all very confusing, because we had this whole design document about not fighting on staircases, even though there's nothing about not fighting on staircases. And also, when it came to the Jira task, have you ever used, so with Jira, and if you're familiar with that, you have the task, they have different numbers. I actually had Jira task number 666, which was actually for making a whole bunch of tests for fighting enemies, and as I mentioned, the spawner system was really bad, and it was causing weird things to happen, because yeah, that was something I sort of worked on. But again, like none of the tests actually involved Enki. It was pretty much all entirely Nor, because again, this was very early game. A lot of things didn't really exist, because at this point it was primarily just Nor and bandit enemies, so like moas and spiders didn't exist. Yeah. So him absorbing obstacles scheme. So when it comes to, so yeah, it's okay, maybe it was a bit of an exaggeration saying he only collides with the floor, but yeah, obviously he will collide with like rocks and other props in the scene, but for the most part, yeah, he doesn't collide with static. He only really collides with static meshes, and again, a lot of things are actually ignored, but he does stick to the ground pretty well, though.
So if the tree is just flying across the tree.
So when he wants to teleport, he actually, yeah, he basically, he jumps up, enters a triangle, and then the other triangle he just pops out of. So he does collide with things like trees and such. So basically when teleportation happens, there's a validation to make sure the area he's actually teleport is actually free of things. But as I mentioned before, like a lot of collisions of things like enemy characters and such, and like Nor herself are usually ignored. But yeah, it does do a sort of validation before it teleports in. And there is a situation you can get which is kind of rare, where it's like he teleports out, but then he sort of can remain in this waiting for a valid thing to teleport back in. But that was usually not a problem, because usually there's plenty of room for him to teleport. Yeah?
Was there any consideration about keeping Enki off screen, or even trying to predict when the player is going to move? Did they move alongside them?
Okay, so that's actually very interesting. So basically, Enki's movement actually had a lot of other improvements done after the milestone. So basically, normally when you move, Enki like tries to run next to you, and if you jump, Enki will jump with you. So if you do try to do a parkour, he will attempt to parkour with you, but if he like misses a jump and falls down to his doom, it doesn't matter, he just teleports to fix himself. But yeah, he does have, yeah, that it was a fun thing you could do. He actually does attempt to parkour, but yeah, he does sort of follow the direction you're kind of doing. But again, like, yeah, as I mentioned, like, that was one of the first things that was worked on with Enki. So a lot of time and attention went into actually him navigating, and I'm sure we've all played plenty of games of AI characters following you, and I'm sure we've seen plenty of good and bad things. I think we might be able to wrap up early unless we have anything else. Well, yeah, thank you all for coming. If you would ever talk to me directly about any of the questions, feel free. I'll be here. Okay.